位朋友，大家晚上好！欢迎各位参加由欧洲导师与教练协会和 Mentoring 联合举办的欧洲导师与教练协会100场导师技术在线论坛。今天是32场嘉宾是由来自英国的 Tracy Sinclair 女士，然后她今天要分享的主题是父母和老师必备的教练技术。那首先我们来认识一下今天的演讲嘉宾 Tracy 女士，她是国际教练联合会 ICF 的全球董事会主席，是前一任的，然后他也是 ICF 认证的大师级教练 MCC， 是 ICF 教练认证的评审官，同时也是一位认证的督导和培训师。他同时也入选了 Marshall Goldsmith 全球100教练，然后在2019年的时候，他获得了 Thinkers 50 Marshall Goldsmith 奖全球顶尖教练的殊荣。然后他还是创始了2家公司，一家是 Coach Advancement， 另一家是 Coaching with Conscience， 然后是旨在为了通过教练对社会和环境产生积极影响。最后呢，他与 Jonathan Passmore 教授然后合著了一本书，这本书叫做《成为教练 ICF 基本指南》。今天晚上的讲座由欧洲导师与教练协会与 Mentoring 导师学院联合主办。我们欧洲导师与教练协会是总部设在比利时布鲁塞尔的，专门为导师与教练提供国际资格认证的非营利性组织。Mentoring 是一家总部位于比利时布鲁塞尔的全球化导师服务咨询公司，业务遍及6大洲、35个国家和地区。我们提供的导师技术课程、服务流程和标准以及服务团队都获得了欧洲导师与教练协会的专业认证。Mentoring 中国是一家注册在上海的中欧合资企业，我们是在2019年的11月首次把欧洲导师技术正式引入中国。现在我们正式邀请我们的演讲嘉宾。Now let's warmly welcome Ms. Tracy Sinclair.
Hello everyone, my name is Tracy Sinclair and I am delighted to spend some time with you today talking a little bit about coaching skills, particularly coaching skills that could be used by parents and teachers. To tell you a little bit about me, my career started many years ago as a teacher and translator and interpreter in English and Spanish, and I latterly had a corporate career in financial services. Back in the early 2000s, I then set up my own business in leadership development services, which very quickly specialized into coaching related services in 2005 onwards. As you can see from the information on the screen here, I have had the great privilege of holding many roles linked to coaching. A lot of those have been supporting the International Coaching Federation, and I have worked on several task forces, committees and boards, both at the UK level, the European level and the global level. I also operate as a coach myself, both in the corporate setting and also working for charities, as well as supporting schools and educational institutions to adopt coaching as a style of engaging with staff and also pupils. Other roles that I play in this field are that I am a coaching supervisor. I also teach and train professional coaches, and I have written a book about the ICF core competencies of coaching. What I'd like to position with us today is that in many of our roles, we can often wear several different hats. And I'm sure that most of us wear far more than 3 hats, of course, but there are 3 hats particularly that I'd like to reference today. One hat that we might wear is that of a teacher or a parent. And when we wear that hat, we are probably likely to be doing a lot of sharing, telling, advising and guiding to the pupils or the children that we are supporting. And that telling and sharing and advising and guiding is a very valuable way to educate, to teach and to provide that young person with additional knowledge that they need to succeed, either in school or in their life. There's also another hat that we might wear, which could be that of mentor, which is perhaps where we're combining a little bit of the telling and the sharing and the guiding, with also some questions as well, some invitational inquiries with the young person around what maybe they would like to do or what do they think they should do. So we move from very fully focused on telling and showing and guiding to a little bit of a hybrid of that kind of modality to also one where we are eliciting from the other person some of their own thoughts, their own resources, and their own strategies. If we therefore continue onto this spectrum, the third modality or the third hat that I would like to introduce to us here is that of coach. And the idea here is that in the coaching modality, we are doing even less telling, even less suggesting and guiding and showing, and we are doing much, much more inquiry. So there really is a spectrum at one end, very high levels of tell, and right at the other end, very low levels of tell and high levels of inquiry and elicitation of ideas, thoughts, and strategies from the other person. Our session today is going to focus on that modality of coaching. Another way of looking at this could be to compare coaching with some other ways of working. And you will see here in the purple boxes in the middle, there are 4 examples of how we might work with and engage with another person. We could coach them. We could also mentor, train, teach them. We could also offer consultancy to them, where we're giving advice and strategies and guidance. And there could also be a more therapeutic intervention, which would be called something like counselling or psychotherapy. So by way of an example, if you look at the 4 green boxes on the outside, you'll see how there are different axes on which these different ways of working can sit. We have on the vertical axis, ask and tell. And then on the horizontal axis, we have problem and solution. So if we look at the modality that sits in each of those corners, we will see that coaching sits into the high ask, high solution focused box, which means that our predominant way of working is going to be to ask questions of the other person in order to focus on a solution that they want to find. So this forward-moving, positive, solution-focused and inquiry-based way of working is very characteristic of a coaching approach. To take this a little bit further then and have a deeper look at what coaching means, there are several definitions of coaching around the world. However, most of them tend to say something quite similar in terms of the general philosophy of coaching and also the general characteristics that a coaching style would have. This particular definition that you can see here is the definition of coaching offered by the International Coaching Federation. And this definition describes coaching as partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. So let's have a little look at some of the words in this definition. First of all, the word clients is a generic term for the person that you're talking to or the person that you are trying to support or engage with, which in this instance could be one of the pupils in your class, in your school, or perhaps your son or daughter. And you'll see that we talk about coaching being partnering. What we're trying to do with a coaching approach is to create as much equality as possible and to try to put to one side perhaps some of the existing hierarchy that does exist between us. For example, the hierarchy between a parent and a child, or the hierarchy between a teacher and a child. That hierarchy, of course, exists. However, what we're trying to do is to not speak to the person from the place of that hierarchy. We're trying to come to a psychological level where we meet them and we are collegial, we are partnering, we are supportive and helpful to them. The reason for this is because our psychological research indicates that the more we can create a sense of safety, trust, support, and mutuality, the more likely the other person is to relax, to feel comfortable, to feel supported, to not feel judged, and to therefore be more open in their expression and more open in the possibilities and potential opportunities that they might have to behave or think differently. You'll also see the words thought-provoking and creative process in this definition. The thinking here is that because we know that human beings are creatures of habit, and we tend to have thinking and feeling habits as well as behavioural habits. And so when faced with a new challenge, a new task, a new goal, we are typically likely to apply the same thinking habits as we have done in the past. Now, that may be very helpful and create a great solution. However, in some cases, our habitual thinking is not enough to reach this new goal. It's not enough to address this new challenge. And so coaching is intended to, through the inquiry approach, help the other person to think differently, to provoke new thoughts, to be creative and innovative in that there is a belief that they can think and feel differently. And of course, if someone can think and feel differently, they are also likely to be able to behave differently and take different actions. This is where our inquiry approach comes in very much, because if I am constantly telling someone what to do or telling someone what the answer is, I'm actually giving them all of the information and I'm not encouraging them perhaps so much to think outside of that habit and to think more broadly for themselves. So coaching is really focused on us as the parent or the teacher, really trying to use our curious, positively intended inquiry skills to help the other person think differently, think creatively. You'll see here as well that the definition is talking about it being inspirational. So this goes back to the previous slide around how we're focused on a solution. We're wanting to help the person feel motivated, to feel inspired, to take new action towards a goal that they want to achieve. And ultimately, this is in service of that person really maximizing their personal or professional potential, whatever that might be. So that is the essence of the ICF definition of coaching. What I'd like to do now is to tell you a little bit more about this idea of potential. You'll see on the screen here an equation that we call P equals P minus I. And this was an equation that was created by a gentleman called Tim Galway, who is one of the very early founders of modern thinking around coaching as we are using it today in the world. Tim Galway was actually a sports coach in California in the 70s, and he found that there was a particular adjustment that he made to how he coached people that had a transformational impact on their sporting performance. And in his transformational or his change of his approach, he actually started to use inquiry rather than telling and showing and guiding. Tim Galway has written a very interesting book on this. If you would like to look at that further, it's called The Inner Game of Tennis. And to look at his equation a little bit, you will see that P equals P minus I stands for performance equals potential minus interference. Now, what Tim Galway describes around this equation is that our potential to perform is always at 100%. Our potential to perform is always at 100%. We all know, I'm sure, however, that we don't always perform to the 100% of our potential. We have days when we're not quite as confident. We have days when we're not as strong as we were the day before, or our mindset is not in the right place. And so Tim Galway was curious about, if our potential is always there, what is it that undermines that potential and gets in the way on the day when we want to perform? And what he discovered was its interference. And what he means by interference is things such as, simple interference could be, I have a headache, I feel tired, I haven't slept very well, I feel too cold, I feel too hot, I'm hungry. There could be some very basic physiological needs that, if they're not met, will interfere with my ability to perform to the very best of my potential. However, interference isn't only these physiological characteristics. It could also be things like my thoughts and my feelings. If I'm about to take a big test at school, if my thinking is very critical and very negative, I feel full of fear and nerves and anxiety, that could be classified as a strong amount of interference that is pulling down from my potential to perform on the day. So Tim Galway's theory really focuses on how can we reduce, or even perhaps minimize and eradicate, interference, so that by reducing the interference mentally, psychologically, emotionally, physically, we have more chance on more occasions to tap into our full potential and be the best that we can be, whatever that is. This is really part of the essence of coaching, is how could we support young people, our students, our children, to reduce the interference so that they are in an optimal state in order to perform on that day, whatever the performance is that they want to achieve, whether it's how they perform in a test, whether it's how confident they are in a school play, or when they're singing a song or playing an instrument, whatever the task might be. Here I have listed for you some of the benefits of coaching and the benefits of a coaching approach. Now, the International Coaching Federation has done a lot of research into the efficacy of coaching, and you will see here how there are many benefits that come out of people who have been coached or interacted with in a coaching style. Typically, people feel much more empowered because their own views, their own perspectives, their own ideas are sought and are valued and are experimented with. Coaching is a great way to help someone be more creative and more innovative in their thinking, because they are encouraged to think differently from the normal habits that their brain would draw upon. Coaching also really promotes independent thinking and someone being self-motivated and self-initiated. And when someone feels more independent in their thinking and they are more motivated, they are usually likely to also take a greater amount of responsibility for their actions and have more ownership and accountability for what they are doing. One of the things that is also a very, very typical outcome of being coached or having been communicated with in a coaching style is an uplift in someone's confidence, someone feeling more grounded in themselves, more comfortable with the fact that they've done their best, more confident in their own ideas and their own thinking. And this, of course, is a very helpful byproduct of this kind of style of engaging with someone. There are many different approaches to coaching, and there are many different models and variations on how we might engage in a coaching style with someone. One of the ones I'm just going to share here with you is a very famous model by a gentleman called Sir John Whitmore, who created what is called the GROW model. And this is used very, very widely in many, many contexts. It's also a very simple model to follow, especially when we're also working with young people and younger children. The model is called GROW, and of course the word in itself, in English at least, means growth, to actually develop and flourish and become better at what we're doing. And the letters stand for goal, reality, option, and way forward. So what we would be using with this model is we would be trying to guide the young person through an inquiry, exploring with our questions various aspects of the goal, what they would like to achieve perhaps, when they would like to achieve it, what's important to them about achieving it, and various other inquiries to get a real understanding from them of what is it that they're really trying to work on and make happen. The R for reality invites us to then explore with them, how are things going now? What is the current reality? What have they tried so far? How has that worked for them? How do they feel about where they are in terms of their progress, etc.? And then we move into the thought-provoking phase where we are inviting them perhaps into a brainstorm to consider what are their options? What other things could they do? What if there were no constraints whatsoever? What would be the ideal outcome? In an ideal world, what would they be doing as a next step? So we're really trying to open up the options for them to consider not just their obvious habitual way of thinking, but to consider a broader perspective. And we're trying wherever we can to ask questions to open up that perspective. And then the last one, the W, is way forward, which is really focused on what are you going to do? So once we've explored some options, we might inquire with the person which of those options feels most appropriate. Which of them do you feel most confident about doing? And what might you actually do then as an outcome of the conversation? And you're trying to get some clarity then on their next steps. Now, to really focus well on coaching, there is something also that we must do as well as ask helpful questions. And that is a really equally important skill, which is to listen. One of the biggest skills that anyone taking a coaching approach can bring is to listen deeply, carefully, really focusing all of our attention on that person to truly try to understand exactly what they're trying to say. And there's a model of listening I'd like to share with you around that. This model of listening is called the 3 levels of listening, and it was created by an organisation called the Coaches Training Institute, again, several years ago when coaching first became very popular in the late 80s and early 90s. And this model talks about these 3 levels of listening. Now, perhaps rather unusually, I'm going to start with level 2, because level 2 is what we would call traditional good listening skills. It's an explicit level of listening, which means that I'm literally hearing and capturing the words that the person is saying to me. So in some ways, we might think about this as the data capture almost. We are really trying to pay attention so that we can play back to someone. This is a summary of what you have said, and confirm back that we have captured all of the details and the facts and figures that are important. We may also demonstrate that we are listening by using different listening sounds, by smiling, by nodding, to actually visually show to the other person that we're paying attention. However, for coaching, we want to go a little bit deeper than this. We want to also perhaps delve into what's called level 3 listening, which is really for us to start considering what is implicit in what is being said. For example, what are they not telling me? Or what am I noticing by the energy or the emotion that is coming across? Perhaps at level 2, someone might be saying that they feel prepared and confident for a test, but actually their energy and their body language and their eyes are telling me something different. So at level 3, we are looking more broadly and more deeply into our own interpretation of what we think we are picking up. Now, this is a very, very rich territory for us as listeners. However, we also have to be a little bit careful, because as we go into that space of interpreting what we're hearing, we are, of course, potentially moving into a space of assumptions. And our assumptions may or may not be correct. So when we're working into this deeper, more interpretative level of listening, we are also wanting to check out some of those assumptions. For example, if the person is saying that they are prepared and confident, but I'm sensing that perhaps they're not, I might offer that back and say, whilst I'm hearing you tell me that you're prepared and confident, something I'm picking up is just leading me to wonder if that's really how you feel. So how are you feeling about it really? And you're observing and checking in with the other person. And then, of course, we have level 1 right at the top here, level 1 listening. And that is the listening that we're doing to the words that are going on inside our own head. And of course, I'm sure we all know that that voice inside our own head isn't quiet very often at all. So even though we all are trying to listen, there is always something going on inside our own head that is taking up some of our energy and our attention. For example, what is going on in my head could be that I'm thinking, gosh, this person does seem to be a lot more confident, which is really lovely because they were very nervous about this before. Or perhaps what is going on in my head is, well, I'm really busy at the moment and I don't have a lot of time for this because I've got some other things to do. So I hope we can get this conversation done really quickly. Now, we can't necessarily totally control these thoughts in our head, if only, and we know that the whole world at the moment seems to be obsessed with meditation and mindfulness to try to calm our minds. And that may or may not be possible. But what we're trying to do here is to notice that inner dialogue and just check with ourselves, is this helpful to the conversation that I'm trying to have? Or would it be more helpful if I could put those thoughts to one side just for a few minutes so that I can really focus and be present with this other person? Moving back to coaching questions then, here are some examples of a few very good and very typical coaching questions that you could ask. And there are many other sources of great questions. However, personally, I would try to avoid a list of questions and really just focus on totally paying attention and being really present with the other person and allowing your natural questions to come to you. But here are a few that could be useful to get a conversation going. What do you want to achieve, or what do you want to change? And you could explore what is stopping you from doing that and what might help you to achieve it. How important is this to you? And what will things be like once you have achieved it? And what are you going to do next? So in a way, we are somehow trying to move around that GROW model of goal, reality, options, and way forward, with a few very simple questions. Now, in reality, you would probably ask more questions than this, but hopefully this gives you an idea of the kind of approach that we're taking. Is we're asking a question and inviting the other person to open up rather than us give solutions and advice and guidance. Now, in reality, this is probably the hardest part of taking a coaching approach, because most human beings are quite conditioned to want to help. And we, of course, as teachers, want to help our pupils, and as parents, we want to help our children. And so it is a very, very strong temptation for us to switch into telling them what to do, giving them advice, instructing them, etc. And of course, there may be times when that approach is absolutely appropriate. Coaching is not the answer every single time. But if we're really wanting to try to demonstrate belief in the other person, to really encourage them to start thinking more independently for themselves, to offer them an opportunity to feel empowered to come up with their own strategies and solutions, then a coaching approach is going to be really, really useful for that. And therefore, for us as the teacher or the parent, we have to really try to exercise perhaps some patience and also some restraint, so that we don't just automatically switch into that telling mode, which perhaps we're more used to. There's also something here about characteristics of good questions, and if we can, the best coaching questions are generally very clear in terms of using just very straightforward, clear language. They tend to be concise and short rather than very lengthy. We also encourage questions to be open, and open questions typically start with things like what, where, how, when, who, etc. Whereas a closed question is going to start with something more like did you, have you, could you, should you. So a closed question is one that is likely to have a yes or a no answer. And in coaching, we want to most of the time avoid those kinds of questions, because we're trying to open up the other person. What we're also trying to do is to ask single questions rather than lots of questions at the same time. And the questions are intended to expand their thinking and elicit, draw out their thinking rather than give them our thinking. And then a few final thoughts really to perhaps help some of this coaching style is sometimes perhaps if the child is, or the young person is really struggling with something and we're having to deliver some information that perhaps is difficult for them to hear. Maybe they haven't got the grade that they wanted or the grade that they need, or there's some kind of difficult information for them to take on board. Here are a few steps from a gentleman called Michael Grinder, who has been instrumental for many years in the field of non-verbal intelligence and non-verbal communication. And he, having worked in education for over 40 years, has found that giving difficult information to young people can work very, very well when it's done in a particular way that he advocates here in these points on the slide. So what he would advocate is that wherever possible, when you are trying to give some difficult information, to bring something visual in rather than just have person to person. Because if you're bringing something visual in, perhaps like a notebook or some information that you're sharing, you can actually refer to that information rather than deliver the difficult information through direct eye contact. So what he recommends is that you take that visual information and you take it very slightly off to the side so that you can refer to it. So that when you are giving the difficult data, you are momentarily moving your eye contact from directly to the person to referring to the information, and then you're coming back to the person. And every time the difficult information is referenced, you refer across here with your eyes and your hand to the piece of paper or wherever the information is. What he is also advocating is that we try to use third-person language. So, for example, instead of me looking at the person in eye contact and saying, you did not get the sufficient grade, or you have not done very well, which is in second person, that, according to his research, can feel very, very difficult, very confrontational for the young person to receive. Whereas if we put the information here with the grade and we say, the grade was not good enough, and then come back to the other person and say, what can we talk about in order to improve that grade? By separating our personal relationship from the problem, we are able to still effectively deal with the problem, but maintain the safety of the parent-child or the teacher-child relationship that we have. So once again, as an example, it would be, instead of saying, you haven't got a good enough grade, it would be instead saying something like, the grade isn't good enough for this test. I'd like to talk to you so that we can work out a solution, what to do about that. And we're separating the problem from the solution. This means then that the solution is associated with you as the parent or the teacher, which is very nurturing for your relationship with them. And then a few final thoughts on positive mindset and nurturing mindsets, linking on from what I just shared about the feedback example, is how could we, through our language, how could we, through the way we engage with young people, nurture a positive mindset for them? And one of the things that I have always found fascinating is a statement or a quote by Henry Ford, who was the founder of Ford Motors, who said that whether you believe that you can or you believe that you cannot, you are right. And this is really quite a powerful thought, I think, because what he is basically saying is that our beliefs become our truth. Our beliefs become our reality. And so in some ways, our brain can almost be like a search engine where we type something in and the search engine just comes back with all sorts of examples. So if what we're typing into the search engine is something negative, we will get lots and lots and lots of negative examples coming up. Whereas if we focus on putting in something positive, we will equally get lots of positive things coming back. So in our language, if we can try to focus on as positive a language as we can, we are going to be nurturing positive beliefs and positive mindsets for young people's learning. Now, on the other hand, even though positive language is very helpful, negative language can actually be very unhelpful. There was an interesting piece of research many years ago, which was around young children, for example, walking on a wall, as young children like to do, to balance on a wall. And often parents or teachers would be very alarmed and thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to fall on the floor and hurt themselves. And so it can be a strong temptation for us to say, mind you, don't fall. And yet, interestingly, what was found is that if we were to say that, the person is more likely to fall than if we'd said nothing at all. And the reasoning for this is because our brain can't imagine and process not falling until it has understood what falling is. And so every time we have what's called a negative command, like don't fall, the brain is actually having to think about not falling. But before it does that, it has to think about falling. And of course, the minute the brain thinks about falling, we're more tempted or we're more likely to fall. This is very, very commonly known as well when people are trying to change their habits. When people are saying things like, I want to stop smoking, or I want to stop drinking, or I want to stop doing anything. It's because it's a negatively framed goal, our brains are spending a lot of energy on the opposite action. Whereas if the brain was focused on a positive goal, it's going to be a lot easier. So, for example, if our young pupil or our young son or daughter was to say, I want to stop submitting my homework late, which is a negative goal, I want to stop being late, then the question could be, if you were not being late, what would you be instead? And we're inviting them to think about their goal in a more positive way. Given that something like 88% or more of our belief structures and our belief systems as adults are initially nurtured and formed through our connection with a significant person in our lives, usually a parent or a teacher. It's really important, therefore, that as our roles as parents and teachers, we are able to start instilling some of these positive instructions, positive messages to the brain, so that we move to a place of I can rather than I can't. And in that way, we can really be the big, strong lion in the mirror that we want to be. And finally, I'm going to leave you with a little poem that I have always loved dearly, and I believe has its roots in the East. So I've chosen this, hopefully, because you may appreciate this. And this poem says, watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become deeds. Watch your deeds, they become habits. And watch your habits, they become character, and character is everything. So I leave you with that thought. As parents and teachers, what kind of thoughts could we encourage in our pupils and our children? What kind of words could we use that start to encourage positive thoughts and positive feelings for them, so that they can really tap into their very best potential? And on that note, I will say thank you very much. It has been an absolute pleasure to share this information with you. I do hope that you have found it interesting and useful in some way. And I am really looking forward to the opportunity of engaging with some of you with any questions or observations that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tracy, for great sharing. 大家如果现在有什么问题的话，可以提问。Now is the Q&A time. And Tracy, we have some questions from the audience, and I will put them in the chat box.
Thank you, Icy.
Yes, the first question is about smoking.
Okay, so recently a friend of mine fell ill due to years of smoking. How can I convince him by using positive language? Okay, thank you. So this is a wonderful question. The key thing here is really to think about what is the positive goal. So if the person would like to stop smoking or quit smoking, the invitation would be, what would they like to do instead? So to try to encourage them to focus on a new habit, a new positive habit that would replace the habit they are trying to stop.
这位朋友的问题是说，最近他的一个朋友因为多年吸烟的习惯，最近就是生病了。他的问题是他如何能够去通过利用积极的语言，让这位朋友去能够戒烟。因为刚才 Tracy 女士她讲到了关于消极语言这一块，然后就大概是然后提了这个问题。那 Tracy 的回答呢，也是首先是基于一个目标，就是一个朋友他如果想戒烟的话，那就要专注在一个积极的目标上面。那你可以就是向他提一些问题，让他去思考，去鼓励他，就是想一想是 养成一个积极的习惯，对他而言又是怎样的？以此就是来取代之前的那种戒烟的这种消极的想法。
And I could say a little more, I see, actually, and that is that it is more effective for our brain to focus on a new habit rather than trying to stop an old habit. And the key is to really place regular attention on the new habit and also to allow time and to seek regular positive feedback on our efforts towards the new habit, so that gradually we build a new neural pathway in our brain for the desired habit, and then the old habit goes into the background.
Thank you. Tracy 他说到说，其实我们大脑里是对于建立一个新的习惯这样的信息的接受度是更高的，比起你一直去想要比如说戒烟这样的事情，可能让你的大脑就是一直是产生了消极的想法。但是如果说能够在你的大脑里建立一个新的想法的机制，并且同时周围的人能给予你的这个机制积极的反馈，这样呢更有助于在你的大脑里形成一个新的思维路径。Thank you, Tracy.
Tracy.
Hello, Min. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Yes, from your lecture, I think it's easier to coach people to gain confidence. But for people who are very dominant and very aggressive, how can we coach them to be peaceful? Because I don't think we have many opportunities to talk in front of them. Yes, that's my question. Yeah.
Thank you, Min. Icy, do you want to translate the question or shall I answer?
Answer first.
Answer, okay. So this is a little bit harder in a way, and I think, Min, it depends upon whether, one, the person is aware of their behaviour, and two, do they want to change it? Sometimes people who are a little bit more dominant may not necessarily realise that that's how they are being perceived. And so sometimes for the coaching to work, it may be that they would need to have had some kind of feedback that the way they are behaving is not being so well received by others. And then we could come in with a coaching style to help them think about how would they like to be perceived by other people, and what behavioural change might they want to make in order to have that perception.
Okay, thank you very much.
他提了一个问题，就是说我们通过教练技术可能就是很容易让一个人变得自信起来，但是遇到那些在生活中就是工作或生活中比较强势比较激进的人，我们就是如何能够让他们可能行为态度就是能够平和下来。那这个呢，在遇到这种人，可能主要是有两个方面的考虑。首先就是你看这个人他是否意识到自己的言行可能是比如说这么强势的，是不是不被他人能接受的。好，第二个就是看这个人他是否愿意改变他的这种行为，因为有时候有的人他强势，但是他并没有意识到这一点，他也没有意识到自己的强势可能给别人带来了什么不好的影响，或者说让别人不是很就是能接受。那这个时候我们作为教练可以就是给他反馈，这个反馈首先要让他意识到他的行为可能并不那么让他人能够接受，并不那么受欢迎。那我们就通过我们的教练方式是引导他去思考，是他首先他是不是希望他的行为风格能够被别人接受，那他然后再思考他就是怎么样做才能够转变他的行为风格，然后让使别人跟他相处的时候能够更舒服。
Another question here. What do you think of the relationship between coaching and mentoring and how they can contribute to help people? Yeah, thank you, Sunshine. And mentoring, I think, are very similar in that they are both intended to support and enable other people. They have a slight difference in that with mentoring, there is going to be slightly more contribution of my thinking towards the other person, my ideas, my suggestions, my experiences, resources, etc. Whereas with coaching, I'm going to be doing less of that, and I'm going to be more trying to draw their thinking from them. The difference really between coaching and mentoring is the amount to which I'm bringing my thinking in and the extent to which I'm just drawing upon the other person's thinking. And so I think the secret to the success of this really is to know what is the balance to be struck. Sometimes my thinking might be very, very valuable to the other person, and sometimes perhaps my thinking is a little bit premature or unnecessary if I just draw the thinking out from the other person a little bit longer. So it's a judgment of the coach or the mentor to know how to strike that balance.
我们第三个问题呢是关于导师和教练之间的关系，他们之间有什么区别？那导师和教练呢，他们是有相似的点，他们都是来就是帮助然后激励别人的。那他们也有一些细小的差别。那在导师，他更倾向于，比如说向另一个人去，比如说贡献自己的想法、自己的一些思考方式、自己的一些资源、一些建议。那作为教练呢，更多的是一个事，然后激发个人，让他去思考，进行创造性的思考。所以他这个区别主要在于，就是我的想法这个比重还是我说我，然后就是这两者之间的一个投入度，一个差别。那对于导师和教练呢，主要就是要掌握一个平衡，就是你是更多贡献自己的想法，还是说更多的去激发别人的思考？因为有的时候我们的想法是很有价值的，但是有的时候呢，我们的想法可能又是比较的过于成熟，可能去让别人思考可能会更好一点。主要的就是你在这两者之间能掌握一个平衡。Tracy， 还有其他的问题吗？ Here is another question. What's listening?
Must be something disturbing in our mind when we're listening. What if we miss some critical information? How to reconcentrate quickly? So this is a great question. As human beings, we can very, very easily get distracted from paying attention. In fact, it's very difficult to pay 100% attention to someone else. Key, I think, is a couple of things. One is, if you really want to be able to deeply listen to someone else, it can be very useful to prepare ourselves before we start working with them, to give our mind the chance to calm down, to move away distractions from what we have just been doing, and allow ourselves to quieten our mind and get ready to listen to someone. I think that is a very helpful practice for us to do initially. And then if we do find that we are distracted, one of the things that we could actually say is to be honest to the other person and say, I noticed myself just getting distracted with my thoughts there. Please, could you share with me again what you just mentioned, and actually be transparent and honest about that. The key here is, as soon as we notice the distraction, to try to auto-correct and come back to being present again. And the more we do that, the more we can stay present and listen for more extended periods of time with practice.
这边一个问题是说，因为我们常常比如说在听别人讲话的时候，经常可能会容易分心。那如果说就是我们因为分心，可能就是错失了对方话语里的一些重要信息怎么办？又如何让自己能够快速的重新集中我们的注意力？那我们作为人确实是很容易分心的，因为大家其实很难做到你对别人在讲话的时候，你能做到100%的这个集中注意力。在这个时候，我们可以比如说做一个练习，我们在做比如说做教练的时候，或者说在跟别人对话之前，你可以先就是让自己花一段时间先准备好，让自己平静下来，因为你刚才可能在讲其他的事情，那你现在需要花时间让自己的心思、自己的大脑就是彻底平静下来，是为 下一段对话，然后做好准备。那如果真的分心，那你可以就是直接诚实的跟对方说，我刚刚不好意思，我刚刚可能就是有点分心了，没有听到你刚才讲的话，你可以再分享一遍嘛？因为这样呢，也可以跟对方就是坦诚透明的进行对话，这样别人也是愿意再分享一遍的。就是我们可以就保持真诚。在最后要强调的就是，我们确实在整个过程当中要尽量的去不断的练习，让自己一直处在这个对话的场域中。这个场域也是我们作为导师和教练会非常重要的一个环节。那你要不断的就是能够让自己延长你自己处在这个场域里，身在当下的这个时间。Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
那还有其他的问题吗？那大家如果还有其他的问题，可以把问题就反馈给我们的工作人员，到时候我们也会让他反馈这样的问题，然后我们再到时候回复大家。Questions, and then we will collect them and send questions.
Yeah, if I can share any answers, I'll be happy to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Share the screen, and we will need the feedback from the audience. 时间参加我们的讲座，然后大家有任何的话，可以下方的二维码，然后留下这个宝贵意见。我们也非常期待，然后得到大家的反馈。我们的下期预告，我们的下一次讲座也是在下周，是2月22号的晚上8点跟9点到9点。我们的演讲嘉宾是来自美国的 Marcia 博士，他是 ICF 的第5任会长，也是 ICF 认证的大师级教练，同时呢也有自己创办的公司。他跟我们分享的主题是如何在对话中营造心理安全感，成3个心理习惯。如果大家感兴趣，可以扫右方的二维码，一起可以加入我们。在讲座的最后呢，我们跟大家分享一下，我们在今年的9月3号到5号，我们即将在瑞士达沃斯举办第2届全球组织隐性技能管理论坛。感兴趣的朋友可以点击右下方的我们的官方网站去了解更多的信息。今天的讲座就到这里，非常感谢大家的参与。And Fisher is in another meeting, so he can't join us today. And he will send you an email to express his appreciation.
That's
Thank you
perfectly
very
fine.
much for your wonderful sharing, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Icy, and thank you, everyone. See you again soon. Bye-bye for now.
See you. Bye-bye.